The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Clara Gibson staggered through the dusty street of Sweetwater, Texas. 1878. Her swollen face a testament to the price she'd paid for her voice, a voice that had once soared like a bird above the cacophony of saloon pianos and drunken shouts, but now lay silent behind split lips and a spirit nearly broken. The townsfolk averted their eyes as she passed. Some from shame, others from indifference. The fate of a saloon singer was hardly worth disrupting the delicate social balance of a frontier town. Clara clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her slender shoulders, each step sending ripples of pain through her bruised ribs. The beating had been thorough this time. Jeremiah Walsh, owner of the Golden Nugget Saloon, had made his point with fists and boots when she dared sing a song not on his approved list, a haunting ballad about freedom that had silenced the rowdy crowd, and for a brief, magical moment, transformed the smoky saloon into something almost sacred. Walsh hadn't appreciated the interruption to his customers' drinking. "You sing what brings in money," he'd snarled before the first blow landed, "or you don't sing at all." Now, as Clara limped toward the boarding house where she rented a small room, she wondered if she would ever sing again. Perhaps her voice, like so many dreams in this harsh land, would simply dry up and blow away with the desert dust. "Miss, you need help." The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked its owner as a Texan, though not local. Clara flinched, her body tensing with instinctive fear before she turned to face the stranger. He sat atop a dappled gray horse, silhouetted against the setting sun. The broad brim of his hat cast shadows across his face, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that studied her with surprising gentleness. A rifle rested in a leather scabbard beside his saddle, and dust covered his clothes, suggesting a long ride. "I'm fine," Clara whispered, her voice cracking with the lie. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in a saddle. As he stepped closer, the dying sunlight revealed more of his features, a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, and a small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his weathered face. "Name's Reece Holden," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "Just rode into town. Seems to me a lady who's been knocked around as bad as you have might need a doctor." Clara took an unsteady step backward. "There's no doctor in Sweetwater worth the name. Besides, I can't pay. Didn't ask about payment." Reece reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean bandana. He offered it to her without stepping closer. "For your lip, it's still bleeding." Clara hesitated, then took the cloth, pressing it gently against her mouth. "Thank you, Mr. Holden. Who did this to you?" His voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "It doesn't matter." Clara turned away. "Things work differently here than wherever you're from. Some lessons are taught with fists in Sweetwater." "What lesson was worth this?" Reece asked quietly. Clara gave a bitter laugh that sent pain shooting through her ribs. "That a saloon singer should know her place, that music should serve whiskey sales, not stir men's souls." She shook her head slightly. "I forgot myself and sang something real. My mistake." Reece's expression darkened. "Where can I find the man who did this?" "You can't fight every bully in the West, Mr. Holden. Not trying to, just asking about this particular one." Clara studied him, trying to understand what drove a stranger to involve himself in her troubles. He didn't have the look of those men who occasionally offered help in exchange for favors she couldn't afford to give. "The Golden Nugget Saloon," she finally said. "Jeremiah Walsh owns it." "But whatever you're thinking, don't. He's got half the town in his pocket, including the sheriff." Reece nodded, replacing his hat. "I appreciate the warning. Now, I meant what I said about seeing to those injuries. My sister was a nurse during the war, taught me enough to clean a cut proper." Clara wavered, torn between suspicion and the genuine concern in his eyes. "I have a room at Mrs. Baxter's boarding house. She'll raise holy hell if I bring a man upstairs." A slight smile touched Reece's lips. "Then we won't go upstairs. Is there a kitchen or somewhere we might sit a spell?" "All I need is clean water and a few minutes." Against her better judgment, Clara nodded, There's a back porch. Mrs. Baxter usually retires early with her tonic. They walked in silence, Reece leading his horse and matching his stride to Clara's painful gait. The boarding house was a two-story white building with faded gingerbread trim and a wide porch that wrapped around to the back. True to Clara's prediction, the house was quiet, the windows dark except for a single lamp burning in what appeared to be a sitting room. On the back porch, Clara sank gratefully onto a wooden bench while Reece tied his horse to the railing. He produced a small kit from his saddlebag and set about cleaning the worst of her cuts with a gentleness that belied his rough appearance. "You never said what brings you to Sweetwater," Clara murmured as he worked. "Looking for work," Reece replied. "Heard they're hiring at the Circle S ranch. You're a cowboy, among other things." His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her forehead with unexpected tenderness. "Been riding since I was old enough to reach the stirrups. Fought in the war when I was barely more than a boy, did some scouting for the army after. Now I go where the work is." Clara winced as he dabbed at a particularly deep cut. "The Circle S is a good outfit. Silas Thornton runs it fair, pays on time." "Good to know." Reece finished his ministrations and sat back. "There, can't do much about the bruising, but those cuts should heal clean now." In the lantern light, Clara could see him more clearly. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe 30 or 32, with strands of silver at his temples. His hands, now cleaning his supplies, were strong and calloused, but they'd touched her with a care she hadn't experienced in years. "Why are you helping me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Reece was quiet for a long moment. "My ma used to sing," he said finally. "Had the voice of an angel, she'd sing while she worked, sang us to sleep every night. When I was 12, my pa died, and she took to singing in places like your Golden Nugget to keep food on the table." His jaw tightened. "One night, a man didn't like that she wouldn't join him after her songs, beat her so bad she lost her eye, but worse than that, she lost her nerve to sing. Never heard her voice again after that night." Clara felt tears gathering. "I'm sorry. She died 3 winters later. Consumption, they said, but I think it was something else. Think her heart just gave out from keeping all those songs bottled up inside." Reece looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "So when I see a woman beaten for singing, it matters to me." They sat in silence as the night deepened around them, the distant howl of a coyote floating across the prairie. Finally, Clara spoke. "I should go in before Mrs. Baxter notices the light." Reece stood, gathering his things. "I'll find a place to bed down for the night. Will you be safe here?" Clara nodded. "Walsh has made his point. He won't come looking for me tonight." "And tomorrow?" Reece asked, his expression serious. "Tomorrow I'll go back to the Golden Nugget and sing whatever songs Walsh wants me to sing," Clara replied, resignation heavy in her voice. "I need the work, Mr. Holden. There aren't many options for a woman alone in Sweetwater." Reece seemed about to object, then nodded slowly. "I understand necessity, Miss Gibson, but remember, not all cages have locks you can see." He tipped his hat and turned to untie his horse. Clara stood in the doorway, watching as he led the animal toward the livery stable at the end of the street. Only when he disappeared into the shadows did she realize she'd never told him her last name. The next morning, Clara woke to the sounds of Mrs. Baxter's heavy tread on the stairs, followed by a sharp rap at her door. "Clara Gibson, there's a gentleman caller asking after you." "I don't run that kind of establishment, as I've told you before." Clara hurried to the door, wincing at the stiffness in her battered body. "It's not like that, Mrs. Baxter. He's just a—" She paused, unsure how to describe Reece Holden. "A friend, Mrs." Baxter's pinched face registered clear disbelief. "Well, this friend is waiting in my parlor, drinking my good tea and tracking dust onto my clean floors. See that he doesn't stay long." In the small parlor downstairs, Clara found Reece standing by the window, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable amid Mrs. Baxter's collection of porcelain figurines and lace doilies. He turned at her entrance, his expression softening. "You look better this morning," he said by way of greeting. It wasn't true, of course. If anything, the bruises had darkened overnight, spreading across her face in mottled patterns of purple and yellow. But there was something in his eyes that made her feel as though he was seeing past the injuries to something else. Mrs. Baxter thinks you have dishonorable intentions, Clara said with a small smile that pulled at her split lip. Mrs. Baxter's probably right to be suspicious of strange men, Reece replied, setting down his teacup. I came to tell you I've got work. Silas Thornton hired me on this morning. That's good news. It is, but I'll be riding out to the ranch today, won't be back in town for a week or more. He hesitated. I wanted to make sure you were all right before I left. Clara was touched by his concern, even as she reminded herself not to read too much into it. I've survived worse, Mr. Holden, and it's not as if we're friends, he finished for her. Maybe not yet. But I'd like to think we could be. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Brought you something. Clara unwrapped it to find a small tin of salve. It's witch hazel and arnica, Reece explained. Good for bruises, my sister's recipe. Thank you. Clara clutched the tin, unexpectedly moved by the simple kindness. You didn't have to do this. I know, Reece shifted, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. There's something else about the golden nugget, Clara tensed. What about it? I stopped by there this morning. Had a word with Walsh. You did what? Clara's voice rose in alarm. Nothing dramatic, Reece assured her, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Just introduced myself as the new hand at Circle S. Mentioned that Silas Thornton has been looking for a place where his men could enjoy some good music when they come to town. Said I heard from some folks that the Golden Nugget had the best singer in 3 counties. Clara stared at him in disbelief. And Walsh. Walsh suddenly became very interested in keeping his singer happy and whole. A dangerous smile flashed across Reece's face. Circle S hands spend good money when they're in town. Walsh understands business incentives. You shouldn't have done that, Clara whispered, though a small flame of hope kindled in her chest. Walsh isn't a man to be trifled with. Neither am I, Reece replied simply. He picked up his hat and moved toward the door. I have to ride out now, but I'll be back in town next Saturday. The boys are talking about coming in for some entertainment. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. Will you be singing? Clara found herself nodding. Yes, I'll be singing. Good. Reece settled his hat on his head. I'm looking forward to hearing your voice, Miss Gibson. Your real voice, singing whatever song moves you. After he left, Clara stood in the parlor, the tin of salve clutched in her hand, wondering what sort of man would ride into town and append her carefully constructed survival strategy within a day of meeting her. More importantly, she wondered why the thought of him returning to hear her sing made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That evening, when Clara arrived at the Golden Nugget, she braced herself for Walsh's wrath. Instead, he barely glanced at her bruised face, merely grunting that she'd better be ready to sing by 8 o'clock. The piano player, a kind-eyed man named Samuel who'd been with the saloon for years, raised his eyebrows in question when she took her place beside the piano. What happened with Walsh? Samuel murmured as he shuffled through sheet music. He's been almost civil today. Clara hesitated, then replied softly, I seem to have found an unexpected patron. That cowboy from Circle S, Samuel nodded knowingly. Word travels fast. Walsh has been telling everyone how the Golden Nugget is the exclusive entertainment venue for Circle S ranch hands. He studied her bruised face with concern. Just be careful, Clara. Men like that cowboy blow through town like tumbleweeds. They don't stay, and when they're gone, you'll still be here with Walsh. Clara knew Samuel was right. Getting her hopes up based on a stranger's intervention was foolish. Yet as she began to sing, she found herself scanning the crowded saloon, half expecting to see Reece's weathered face among the patrons, even though she knew he'd ridden out to the ranch. The week passed slowly. Clara sang each night at the Golden Nugget, and while Walsh remained surly, he kept his distance. Her bruises began to fade, helped by Reece's salve, which smelled of herbs and something else she couldn't quite identify, something that reminded her of open spaces and freedom. By Saturday, the entire town was buzzing with anticipation. The Circle S Hand's monthly visit to town was always good for business, but this time there was added interest due to the rumors about the new cowboy who'd stood up to Jeremiah Walsh. Clara found herself spending extra time preparing for the evening, pinning up her chestnut hair and wearing her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. "You're primping like a girl going to her first dance," Mrs. Baxter observed disapprovingly as Clara descended the stairs. "I hope you remember that whatever that cowboy did, he did it for his own reasons, not for you." Clara's cheeks burned at the older woman's perception. "I'm dressing for all the customers, Mrs. Baxter. It's part of my job," the landlady sniffed. "Just mind you remember the difference between performing and promising. Men don't defend women without expecting something in return." The golden nugget was packed by the time Clara arrived. The Circle S hands had ridden in, bringing with them the rowdy energy of men who'd spent weeks on the range. They filled the tables, ordered rounds of whiskey, and called out good-natured insults to one another across the smoky room. Clara's eyes searched for Reece, but couldn't find him among the crowd. Disappointment settled heavy in her chest as she made her way to her usual spot beside the piano. Perhaps he'd changed his mind, or never intended to return at all. Perhaps the whole thing had been nothing more than a moment's chivalry from a passing stranger. Samuel gave her a sympathetic look as he began the introduction to her first song. Clara closed her eyes, gathering herself to perform the usual saloon favorite's body, simple tunes designed to keep the whiskey flowing and the men entertained. But just as she opened her mouth to sing, the saloon doors swung open and a hush fell over the crowd. Clara turned to see Reece Holden standing in the doorway, flanked by two other men wearing Circle S brands on their vests. The week of ranch work had darkened his tan and added a new layer of dust to his clothes. But he stood tall and confident, his eyes finding hers immediately across the crowded room. As he made his way toward an empty table near the front, Walsh emerged from his office, a false smile plastered across his face as he hurried to greet his important customers. Clara couldn't hear their exchange over the resumption of noise in the saloon, but she saw Walsh nod repeatedly, then turn toward the bar to order drinks. Samuel leaned close. "Looks like your patron has arrived. What would you like to sing for him?" Clara's mind raced through her repertoire, settling on a song she'd learned from her mother years ago, a ballad about a woman who disguised herself as a sailor to follow her love to sea. It wasn't the kind of song that typically played well in saloons, with no chorus for drunken men to join in and no suggestive lyrics to elicit hoots and hollers. "Play the Sailor's Bride," she whispered to Samuel, his eyebrows shot up. "Walsh won't like it." "Just play," Clara replied, a new determination strengthening her voice. As the piano's opening notes filled the saloon, conversations began to quiet. Clara took a deep breath and began to sing, her clear soprano rising above the ambient noise. She kept her eyes fixed on a point above the crowd, afraid to look directly at Reece, afraid to see disappointment or, worse, indifference in his gaze. The ballad told of love and sacrifice, of a woman who gave up everything she knew for a chance at happiness with the man she loved. As Clara sang the final verse, describing how the disguised woman finally revealed herself during a storm at sea, saving her lover's life in the process, she finally allowed herself to look at Reece. He sat completely still, his whiskey untouched before him, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his expression, a mixture of wonder and recognition that made her voice strengthen, reaching notes she'd been afraid to attempt since the beating. When the song ended, there was a moment of complete silence before the saloon erupted in applause. Even some of the hardened ranch hands wiped suspiciously at their eyes, and Samuel gave her an approving nod as he segued into a more familiar tune to keep the momentum going. Walsh appeared at her side, his smile tight. "That's enough of that sentimental garbage," he hissed. "Give them something they can drink to, or you'll regret it." Before Clara could respond, Reece was there, seemingly materializing beside them. "That was the finest singing I've heard since leaving home," he said, ignoring Walsh completely as he addressed Clara. "The boys and I would be mighty pleased to hear another like it." Walsh's face contorted with conflicting impulses, anger at being countermanded in his own establishment and fear of losing the lucrative Circle S business. Finally, greed won out. "Of course," Walsh said with a strained smile. Miss Gibson is free to sing whatever our valued customers request. Reece's gaze never left Clara's face. What would you like to sing next, Miss Gibson? Something that matters to you? For the first time in years, Clara felt the full weight of real choice. She could sing whatever she wanted, at least for tonight, with Reece Holden and his fellow cowboys as her shield against Walsh's retribution. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'd like to sing The Wanderer's Return," she said softly. Samuel nodded and began to play, and Clara sang with everything in her, pouring years of suppressed emotion into each note. She sang song after song that night, each one chosen from the heart rather than from Walsh's approved list. The saloon remained packed, with men ordering drinks not to drown their sorrows but to have an excuse to stay and listen. Throughout the evening, Reece remained at his table, nursing the same whiskey, his eyes rarely leaving her. Once or twice, she caught him smiling at something in her performance, a particularly well-delivered phrase or an expressive gesture, and each time, warmth spread through her chest. As the night drew to a close and the patrons began to drift out, Reece approached the piano. Up close, Clara could see the weariness etched in his features, evidence of a long week's hard work, yet his eyes remained alert and warm. "Would you allow me to walk you home, Miss Gibson?" he asked, his hat in his hands. Clara glanced at Walsh, who was counting the night's substantial earnings behind the bar. He gave her a curt nod, his expression sour but resigned. "I'd like that," she replied, gathering her shawl. The night air was cool and sweet after the smoky confines of the saloon. They walked in companionable silence for a few moments, the sounds of their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalk. Above them, stars scattered across the vast Texas sky like diamond dust on black velvet. "You have a remarkable voice," Reece finally said. "Those songs, they weren't just entertainment. You made people feel something real tonight." Clara ducked her head at the praise. "Thank you for making it possible. I haven't been able to sing like that since." She trailed off, unwilling to revisit the memory of Walsh's fists. "Since you were beaten for it," Reece finished quietly. "I meant what I told Walsh last week. You'll sing again with me protecting your right to do so." Clara stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Why, you don't know me, Mr. Holden. You don't owe me anything." Reece's expression grew serious. "Maybe I'm trying to right an old wrong. Maybe I couldn't help my ma, but I can help you." "Is that all it is? Atonement?" Clara wasn't sure why the thought disappointed her. Reece stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent of him. "No," he said simply, "that's not all it is." Clara's heart fluttered against her ribs like a bird testing its wings. "Then what is it?" "I don't rightly know yet," Reece admitted, "but I'd like the chance to find out." He gestured toward the boarding house, now visible at the end of the street. "May I call on you tomorrow, properly in daylight, with Mrs. Baxter's disapproving glare and all?" A smile tugged at Clara's lips. "Yes, you may." They resumed walking, and when they reached the boarding house steps, Reece took her hand briefly, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Until tomorrow, then." Clara watched him stride away, his figure gradually blending into the darkness. For the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something she'd long ago buried beneath layers of practicality and survival hope. True to his word, Reece appeared at Mrs. Baxter's door the following afternoon, hat in hand and wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He had even attempted to tame his unruly hair, though the wind had already begun to undo his efforts. "Mr. Holden," Mrs. Baxter greeted him with a thin-lipped smile. "Clara mentioned you might call today. I presume you intend to take her for a proper walk in town where folks can see you." Reece took the landlady's scrutiny in stride. "Yes, madam. Thought Miss Gibson might enjoy seeing the Sunday social at the church pavilion." Mrs. Baxter's eyebrows rose slightly. "The church social? Well, that's appropriate." She turned and called up the stairs. "Clara, your caller is here." When Clara descended the stairs in her Sunday dress, a modest lavender cotton with white trim, Reece's expression of appreciation made her cheeks warm. In daylight, without the pressure of Walsh's presence or the smoky veil of the saloon, she could see him more clearly. The lines at the corners of his eyes spoke of squinting into the sun and laughing easily. His hands, though rough with work, moved with a controlled grace that suggested gentleness was a choice rather than a struggle. "You look lovely, Miss Gibson," he said, offering his arm. As they walked toward the church at the end of Main Street, Clara was acutely aware of the glances and whispers from townspeople they passed. Sweetwater was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sight of the saloon singer on the arm of the Circle Estiquette's newest cowboy was fodder for immediate speculation. "People are staring," Clara murmured, feeling self-conscious. "Let them," Reece replied with a shrug. "Nothing improper about a man escorting a lady to a church social." "A lady," Clara repeated with a touch of bitterness. "Is that what they see when they look at me? Most of them see a saloon singer one step above a—" "Don't," Reece cut her off firmly. "What they think doesn't matter. What matters is what you know about yourself." He glanced down at her, his expression serious. "And for what it's worth, I see a woman of extraordinary courage and talent, a woman who survived when many would have broken." Clara was saved from having to respond by their arrival at the church pavilion, where tables had been set up bearing potluck dishes, and a small band of local musicians played hymns and folk tunes. Children ran between the tables, their Sunday best already showing signs of play, while their parents socialized in groups. The buzz of conversation dimmed noticeably as Clara and Reece approached. Several women who had been chatting by the punch bowl suddenly found reasons to move elsewhere, while men who recognized Clara from her performances at the Golden Nugget nodded awkwardly before turning away. Reece's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached them. "Clara Gibson, as I live and breathe, it's been an age since you've joined us for a social." She turned to Reece with an appraising look. "And who might this gentleman be, Mrs. Henderson? This is Reece Holden. He's working at Circle S," Clara replied, relieved by the friendly face. Mrs. Henderson had been the schoolteacher when Clara was a child and had always treated her with kindness, even after Clara's circumstances had forced her to seek work at the saloon. "Any friend of Clara's is welcome here," Mrs. Henderson declared loudly enough for nearby eavesdroppers to hear. "Now come, both of you, and try my apple cake. It won first prize at the county fair last year." Under Mrs. Henderson's protective wing, the initial awkwardness began to dissolve. Other townsfolk, seeing the teacher's acceptance, gradually approached, and soon Reece was engaged in conversation with several of the local men about ranching conditions and cattle prices. Clara found herself drawn into a circle of women who, while not entirely comfortable with her presence, were too polite to snub her outright with Mrs. Henderson watching. For the first time in years, Clara experienced a taste of normal social interaction, the kind that didn't involve dodging propositions or enduring lewd comments. As the afternoon progressed, the small band struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to form a dancing circle. Reece appeared at Clara's side, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked with a slight bow that made her smile. "I warn you, I'm more accustomed to dodging drunken cowboys than following dance steps," Clara replied, but she placed her hand in his. "Fortunately, I'm sober and know the steps well enough for both of us," Reece countered, leading her to join the circle. His hand was warm and steady at her waist as they moved through the figures of the dance. Clara was aware of eyes watching them, but for once she didn't feel judged. Perhaps it was Reece's calm confidence, or perhaps it was the simple joy of dancing in the sunshine instead of performing in the stifling confines of the saloon. But Clara felt something inside her loosening, like a tightly wound spring finally allowed to expand. When the dance ended, Reece kept her hand in his. "Would you like to walk a bit? The creek path is pretty this time of year." They slipped away from the social, following a narrow dirt path that wound behind the church and down to Sweet Creek, a modest waterway that gave the town its name. Cottonwood trees lined the banks, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. "This is my favorite place in Sweetwater," Clara confessed as they settled on a fallen log overlooking the water. "Sometimes I come here early in the morning before anyone else is about, just to listen to the birds and remember there's a world beyond the Golden Nugget." Reece nodded, understanding in his eyes. Everyone needs a sanctuary. A place that reminds them who they really are, not just who they have to be to survive. And who are you, Reece Holden, when you're not being a cowboy to survive? Clara asked softly. Reece was quiet for a long moment, watching the play of light on the creek's surface. I'm a man looking for home, he finally said. Been wandering since the war ended, tried settling a few times, but something always pulled me back to the trail. He looked at her directly. Until now, Clara's breath caught in her throat. What's different now? I heard you sing, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Clara understood the power of music to reach into a person's soul and awaken something long dormant. Hadn't her own singing been a lifeline all these years, a way to remember who she truly was despite everything? Tell me about your family, she said, changing the subject before emotions she wasn't ready to name could overwhelm her. You mentioned a sister who was a nurse. Reece accepted the shift in conversation gracefully. Rebecca Becky, we call her. She's married to a doctor now, living in St. Louis with their 3 children. Then there's my brother Richard, who took over the family farm in Tennessee after Ma died. He writes every few months, always asking when I'll come home and stop this foolishness, as he calls it. A fond smile softened Reece's features as he spoke of his siblings. You miss them, Clara observed. Every day, Reece admitted, but the farm was never going to be big enough for all of us, and after the war. He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. Some men came back changed, couldn't settle into the quiet life again. Clara reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. Were you one of them? For a long time, yes. Reece turned his hand to hold hers properly. The war took my youth, Miss Gibson, took my certainty about the world and how it works. I've been searching for something ever since, something I couldn't name but would recognize when I found it. The intensity in his eyes made Clara's heart race. And have you found it? She whispered. Before he could answer, voices drifted down the path, church-goers strolling by the creek, their conversation growing louder as they approached. Reece released Clara's hand reluctantly, standing to offer her assistance up from the log. Perhaps we should rejoin the social, he suggested. I wouldn't want to give Mrs. Baxter additional reasons to disapprove of me. As they walked back toward the church, Clara found herself wondering what Reece might have said if they hadn't been interrupted. More importantly, she wondered why it mattered so much to her. The next 2 weeks established a pattern. Reece rode out to Circle S during the week, returning to town each Saturday with the other hands. Each Saturday night, Clara sang at the Golden Nugget, but now she chose her own songs and sang with her full heart, knowing Reece would be there, watching and listening. Walsh, seeing the increased business her new performance style brought in, grudgingly allowed her the freedom to select her repertoire. On Sundays, Reece would call at the boarding house, and they would spend the afternoon together, sometimes attending church events, other times simply walking through town or sitting by the creek, talking. Clara learned about Reece's time as an Army scout, his travels across the territories, and his dreams of someday having his own small ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Kansas, where her father had been a schoolteacher until his death from influenza when she was 16, forcing her and her mother to seek work wherever they could find it. Mother was the one with the voice, Clara explained as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree one Sunday afternoon. She taught me all the old songs, ballads from England and Ireland that her grandmother had brought across the ocean. When she died 3 years ago, singing those songs was the only way I could keep her with me. Is that why you risked singing them at the Golden Nugget, even knowing how Walsh might react? Reece asked. Clara nodded, absently weaving a crown from the wildflowers she'd gathered. Some things are worth the risk. Those songs are who I am, Reece. Without them, I'm just empty. Reece watched her fingers deftly intertwining the stems. You could never be empty, Clara, he said softly, the use of her first name sending a pleasant shiver through her. Even if you never sang another note, you'd still be the bravest, most alive person I've ever met. Clara looked up, startled by both his words and the emotion behind them. Over the past weeks, they'd gradually moved from formal address to first names when alone, But this was different. This was Reece offering something of himself that went beyond friendship. "I'm not brave," she protested. "If I were brave, I'd have left this town long ago, found somewhere I could sing freely without fear." "And yet you stayed and sang anyway, knowing the cost," Reece countered. "That's a different kind of courage, the kind that faces the storm rather than running from it." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The kind of courage I admire most." The touch of his fingers against her cheek sent warmth cascading through Clara's body. They'd been careful until now, maintaining a respectful distance despite the growing connection between them. This small gesture crossed a boundary they'd silently established, and Clara found herself holding her breath as Reece's hand lingered near her face. "Clara," he murmured, his voice deepening. "I should tell you that well, what have we here?" The harsh voice shattered the moment. Clara jerked back, her heart plummeting as she recognized Jeremiah Walsh stumbling toward them, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. His face was flushed with drink, his eyes narrowed with malice. "Touching scene," Walsh slurred, gesturing with the bottle and causing amber liquid to slosh over his hand. The saloon whore and her cowboy protector sitting in a tree, Reece was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between Clara and Walsh. "You're drunk, Walsh. Go home and sleep it off." Walsh laughed, an ugly sound that scraped against Clara's ears. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. Been watching you two playing your little courtship game all over town these past weeks, making me a laughingstock." He jabbed a finger toward Clara. "You work for me, girl." "I own your voice." "You own nothing," Reece replied, his voice deadly calm. "Miss Gibson sings at your establishment for wages. That's the extent of your relationship." Walsh's face twisted with rage. "Relationship? Is that what you think this is about? Ask her about our relationship, Holden. Ask her what she did to get that job when she first came to town, desperate and hungry." Clara felt sick, the beautiful afternoon crumbling around her. "Stop it, Jeremiah. You're making a fool of yourself." "I'm making a fool of myself." Walsh advanced, his movements unsteady but his malice perfectly focused. "You're the one pretending to be some kind of lady, as if half the men in this town haven't seen you." He never finished the sentence. Reece's fist connected with Walsh's jaw, sending him sprawling backward onto the grass. The whiskey bottle shattered against a rock, its contents seeping into the earth. Walsh lay stunned for a moment, then pushed himself up on one elbow, wiping blood from his split lip. "You'll regret that, Holden. Not as much as you'll regret the next word out of your mouth if it's anything but an apology to Miss Gibson," Reece replied evenly. Walsh spat blood onto the ground. "You think you've won? You think anything's changed because you knocked me down?" He laughed bitterly. "Ask her, Holden. Ask your precious songbird what she'll do when you ride out of town, as men like you always do. Ask her if she thinks she can survive in Sweetwater without me." Reece took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides, but Clara caught his arm. "Don't," she pleaded. "He's not worth it." Walsh struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "You'll be back, Clara. When your cowboy gets bored and moves on, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be so forgiving next time." He turned and staggered away, his dignity in shreds but his threat hanging in the air like the scent of the spilled whiskey. Clara's hands trembled as she gathered her scattered wildflowers, the once cheerful blooms now crushed and broken. "I should go," she whispered, unable to meet Reece's eyes. "Clara, wait." Reece's voice was gentle as he caught her hand. "Whatever Walsh implied is probably true," Clara finished for him, finally looking up. "I was desperate when I came to Sweetwater. My mother had just died. I had no money, no family. Walsh offered me a job singing at the saloon, and I took it." She pulled her hand away. "I'm not ashamed of surviving, Reece, but I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I've never asked you to be anything but who you are," Reece said quietly, "and nothing Walsh said changes how I see you." Clara wanted desperately to believe him. But Walsh's words had awakened all her doubts and fears that what was growing between her and Reece was nothing more than a temporary diversion for him, that eventually he would ride away as he had from so many other places. "I think we both need some time to think," she said, gathering her skirts. "I'll see you at the Golden Nugget on Saturday. Reece didn't try to stop her as she walked away, but she could feel his eyes on her back all the way up the path. Only when she was out of sight did she allow the tears to fall, mourning the loss of something that perhaps had never truly been hers to begin with. The following Saturday arrived with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon, promising a summer storm by nightfall. Clara prepared for her performance at the Golden Nugget with a heavy heart, having neither seen nor heard from Reece since their encounter with Walsh by the creek. Walsh himself had been surprisingly absent from the saloon all week, leaving the day-to-day operations to his bartender. Clara wondered if embarrassment or some lingering effect from Reece's punch had kept him away, but she was grateful for the respite from his presence. As she arranged her hair before the small mirror in her room, Clara tried to prepare herself for all possibilities. Perhaps Reece would come with the other Circle S hands as usual. Perhaps he wouldn't. Perhaps Walsh had been right, and the moment Reece was confronted with the realities of her life in Sweetwater, his interest had evaporated. "You're a fool, Clara Gibson," she told her reflections sternly. A singing fool who should know better than to dream about cowboys. When she arrived at the Golden Nugget, Clara immediately sensed that something was different. The usual Saturday night crowd was there, but the atmosphere was tense, conversations hushed and glances furtive. Walsh stood behind the bar, his bruised jaw evidence of Sunday's altercation, his eyes cold as they followed Clara across the room. Samuel intercepted her before she could reach the piano. "Something's wrong," he murmured, pretending to sort through sheet music. Walsh has been in a foul mood all day, saying things about teaching lessons and putting people in their place. Clara's stomach knotted with apprehension. "Has anyone from Circle S arrived yet?" Samuel shook his head. "No, and that's the other strange thing. Saturday night, nearly 8 o'clock, and not a single ranch hand has come through those doors." He gave her a worried look. "Clara, be careful tonight. Whatever's brewing, it doesn't feel right." Clara nodded, taking her place beside the piano. As Samuel began to play the introduction to her first song, she scanned the room, still hoping to see Reece's familiar figure enter. But the doors remained closed, and the faces watching her belonged to the usual town patrons, men she'd sung for countless times before, none of whom had ever intervened when Walsh exerted his authority. Drawing a deep breath, Clara began to sing. She chose a safe song to start, upbeat and familiar, but her heart wasn't in it. Each time the saloon doors swung open, her hope surged, only to be crushed when another anonymous patron entered. By the third song, she'd resigned herself to Reece's absence, a dull ache settling in her chest. During a brief break, as Samuel played an instrumental piece to allow her to rest her voice, Walsh approached. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he leaned close, ostensibly to offer her a glass of water. "Seems your protector has abandoned you," he observed with malicious satisfaction. "Funny thing about that. Silas Thornton fired him yesterday, something about causing trouble in town and reflecting poorly on the ranch." Clara's blood ran cold. "You're lying." Walsh's smile widened. "Am I? Ask yourself why none of the Circle S boys are here tonight. Ask yourself why your cowboy isn't sitting at his usual table watching you with those puppy dog eyes." He shrugged elaborately. "Men like that don't stay, Clara. I told you as much." Before Clara could respond, Samuel finished his piece and looked to her expectantly. Walsh stepped back, gesturing grandly toward the piano. "Your audience awaits, Miss Gibson. Perhaps something appropriate to the occasion, something about abandonment, perhaps." Clara's legs felt unsteady as she returned to her position. Could Walsh be telling the truth? Had Reece lost his job because of her, because of the confrontation by the creek? The thought was unbearable. Samuel gave her a questioning look, waiting for her cue. Clara stared blankly at the sheet music, unable to focus. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and whispered a song title that made Samuel's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "After what happened last time," Clara nodded firmly. If this was to be her last night singing at the Golden Nugget, if Reece was truly gone and her brief taste of freedom with him, then she would at least reclaim her voice completely. She would sing the song that had caused Walsh to beat her, the song about freedom and the courage to seize it. As the first notes filled the saloon, conversations quieted. Clara closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her, pouring every ounce of emotion into each word. The song told of a bird trapped in a gilded cage, yearning for the wild sky beyond its bars. It spoke of fear and comfort weighed against freedom and risk, and the courage required to leave safety behind. When she opened her eyes at the end of the first verse, she saw Walsh's face darkening with anger. He started toward her, pushing through the crowd with purpose in his stride. Clara continued singing, her voice growing stronger rather than faltering. Let him come. Let him do his worst. She would finish this song. Walsh was halfway across the room when the saloon doors burst open. A gust of wind from the approaching storm swept in, along with the commanding figure of Reece Holden. He was drenched from the first raindrops, his hat dripping, but his eyes blazed as they locked with Clara's across the room. Behind him stood Silas Thornton himself, owner of Circle S Ranch, and nearly a dozen cowboys. Clara never stopped singing, but tears of relief blurred her vision as Reece moved directly into Walsh's path, blocking his approach to the piano. The two men stood face to face, neither speaking, while Clara's voice soared to the song's climax, the moment when the caged bird finds the courage to fly through the door left carelessly open. As the final notes faded, silence gripped the saloon. Every eye moved between the tableau of Reece and Walsh squaring off, and Clara standing tall beside the piano. It was Silas Thornton who finally broke the tension, stepping forward to address the room at large. "Folks of Sweetwater," the rancher announced in a voice accustomed to carrying across open prairie, "I'd like to make an announcement. Circle S Ranch is expanding its operations, and I've decided to invest in some local businesses to diversify our interests." He smiled broadly, revealing tobacco-stained teeth beneath his gray mustache. "As of this afternoon, I am the proud owner of this establishment." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd, Walsh's face drained of color. "What are you talking about, Thornton? This is my saloon." "Not anymore," Thornton replied calmly, pulling a folded document from his vest pocket. "Your loan with the bank was past due. They were happy to sell the note to me, and even happier when I paid it in full this afternoon. The golden nugget now belongs to Circle S Ranch." He turned to Reece with a nod, or rather to my new business partner. All eyes swung to Reece, who remained focused solely on Clara. "It seems I'm no longer just a cowboy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Thornton has graciously agreed to back me in this venture, based on a business plan I presented to him yesterday." Walsh's face contorted with rage. "This is theft. You can't just—" "I believe your employment here is terminated, Mr. Walsh," Thornton interrupted smoothly. "My men will escort you to gather your personal belongings from the office, after which you're welcome to try your luck in the next town over." Two burly cowboys moved to flank Walsh, their expressions making it clear that resistance would be unwise. Walsh's gaze darted around the saloon, seeking allies but found none. The townspeople who had once feared his influence now avoided his eyes, sensing the shift in power. "This isn't over," Walsh snarled, directing his venom at both Reece and Clara. "You think you can just ride in and take what's mine? You'll regret this, both of you." Reece stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that only Walsh could hear. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. Now get out, and if you ever come near Miss Gibson again, they'll find what's left of you in a shallow grave outside town." The threat, delivered with quiet certainty, drained the last of Walsh's bravado. He allowed himself to be led toward his office, shooting one final venomous glance at Clara before disappearing through the door. The saloon erupted in excited conversation. Samuel struck up a lively tune, and the bartender, sensing the celebratory mood, announced that the first round was on the house. Amidst the commotion, Reece made his way to Clara's side. "I owe you an explanation," he said, taking her hands in his. Clara could hardly believe what she'd just witnessed. "You bought the saloon. How? Why?" The how involved convincing Silas Thornton that a saloon with the best singer in Texas would be a sound investment, Reece replied with a small smile. The why should be obvious, Clara. Before she could respond, Thornton approached, extending his hand to Clara. Miss Gibson, I believe we've never been properly introduced, though I've had the pleasure of hearing you sing several times. The rancher's grip was firm as he shook her hand. Reece here has convinced me that your talent is the key asset of this establishment, and I'm inclined to agree. Clara stammered her thanks, still trying to process the evening's dramatic turn. Now, Thornton continued, I'll leave you two to discuss the details of how this place will be run going forward. I'm a silent partner in this venture. My expertise is in cattle, not entertainment. He clapped Reece on the shoulder. Don't forget what we discussed about expanding the stage and adding those new gaslight fixtures. As Thornton moved away to join his men at the bar, Clara looked at Reece in wonder. You planned all this in a week. I thought Walsh said you'd been fired. Reece's expression darkened momentarily. Walsh has a talent for twisting the truth. I asked Thornton for time off to pursue this opportunity. He not only agreed but offered to back me financially when I explained my idea. He squeezed her hands gently. I couldn't tell you because I wasn't sure it would work and I didn't want to give you false hope. Hope for what, exactly? Clara asked, needing to hear him say it. Reece's eyes held her steadily. Hope for a future where you can sing whatever songs move your heart without fear. Hope for. He hesitated, then continued more softly. Hope for us if that's something you might want too. Outside, thunder rumbled as the storm finally broke over Sweetwater. Rain lashed against the windows, but inside the Golden Nugget, Clara felt warmer and safer than she had in years. I want that very much, she whispered. Relief and joy transformed Reece's features. Then there's something I need to say, something I started to tell you by the creek before Walsh interrupted. He took a deep breath. Clara Gibson, from the moment I heard you sing, something inside me that had been restless my whole life finally quieted. I've been searching for home since the war ended, and I found it not in a place, but in your voice, in your courage, in you. Clara felt tears gathering, but these were different from any she'd shed before, tears of a happiness so profound it threatened to overwhelm her. I thought you'd leave, she admitted, her voice breaking. Everyone leaves eventually. Not me, Reece promised. Not anymore, I'm done wandering. In the background, Samuel began playing a sweet, gentle melody, a love song Clara had taught him weeks ago, but had never performed in the saloon. Taking it as the sign it was surely meant to be, Clara smiled through her tears. Then perhaps we should seal this partnership properly, she suggested. With a dance, Reece drew her into his arms right there beside the piano, unconcerned with the speculative glances from the patrons around them. As they swayed to the music, Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. What happens now? She asked softly. Now, Reece replied, his breath warm against her hair, we build something together. The Golden Nugget will be a place for real music, your music, and when you're ready, perhaps we'll think about that little ranch I've always wanted. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. But only when you're ready, Clara. Your voice deserves to be heard by as many people as possible. Clara smiled, a new confidence filling her. Maybe we can have both, a ranch not too far from town where I could still sing at the Golden Nugget a few nights a week. I'd like that, Reece murmured, drawing her close again. But whatever we decide, we'll decide together. As they danced, the storm raged outside, washing away the dust and heat of summer. Inside, Clara felt her own storms, the fears and doubts that had plagued her for so long beginning to subside. In their place grew a certainty that she had found not just protection or temporary sanctuary, but a love that would weather whatever the future might bring. Sing for me, Reece whispered against her temple. Just for me. And there, in the circle of his arms, Clara began to sing softly, her voice meant for his ears alone. It was a simple melody, an old lullaby her mother had taught her. But as the words flowed from her heart, they carried a promise of home and belonging that both of them had sought for so long. In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and the steady rhythm of rain on the roof, Clara knew that the broken parts of her life were finally mending. The woman who had been beaten for singing had found not just her voice again, but her heart's true companion. With Reece beside her, she would sing the songs of her soul without fear, for all the days to come. 3 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their modest ranch house 5 miles outside of Sweetwater, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind her, she could hear Reece's deep voice mixing with Samuel's laughter as they discussed the evening's planned performances at the Golden Nugget, now known throughout the territory as the finest music hall west of San Antonio. The sound of small, running feet made Clara turn just in time to catch the 2-year-old girl who launched herself at her mother's skirts. "Mama sing?" asked little Rebecca, her dark eyes so like her father's wide with hope. Clara smiled, lifting her daughter into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart. Mama's going to sing tonight, and you're going to stay here with Mrs. Henderson and be a good girl, aren't you?" Rebecca nodded solemnly before squirming to be put down, already distracted by a butterfly fluttering near the porch steps. As Clara watched her daughter chase the insect across the yard, she felt Reece's arms encircle her from behind, his chin coming to rest on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Holden," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. Clara leaned back into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am, how different life is now from when you found me that night in Sweetwater." Reece tightened his hold slightly. "I think you found me, Clara. I was just smart enough to recognize the blessing when it appeared." They stood together, watching their daughter's joyful exploration of the world around her until Samuel cleared his throat behind them. "Hate to interrupt this touching scene," he said with a grin, "but we should probably head into town if we want to be set up before the evening crowd arrives." The Golden Nugget's transformation had been remarkable. Under Reece and Clara's management, with Thornton's continued financial backing, the once rough saloon had evolved into a respectable establishment where families could enjoy dinner before the evening's musical performances. Clara sang 3 nights a week, her reputation drawing visitors from as far away as Dallas and Austin. Other nights featured traveling musicians or local talent, with Samuel serving as musical director for the entire operation. Walsh had indeed left town after that stormy night 3 years ago, drifting west toward New Mexico territory. Occasionally, travelers brought news of him running a seedy gambling hall in some dusty border town, his former prominence reduced to bitter memories and exaggerated tales. As they prepared to leave for town, Mrs. Henderson arrived to care for Rebecca. The former schoolteacher had become like family, doting on the child as if she were her own granddaughter. Rebecca ran to her with a squeal of delight, already begging for stories. "Be good for Mrs. Henderson," Reece instructed, kneeling to accept his daughter's enthusiastic hug. "And when we get home, if you're still awake, maybe Mama will sing you a special song." "The bird's song?" Rebecca asked hopefully. Clara smiled, knowing her daughter meant the song about the caged bird finding freedom, the same song she had been singing the night Reece had returned to claim both the Golden Nugget and her heart. She had adapted it as a bedtime story, and it had become Rebecca's favorite. "Yes, the bird song," she promised, dropping a kiss on her daughter's dark curls. The ride into town was pleasant, the summer evening cooled by a gentle breeze. Clara rode beside Reece, their horses walking at an easy pace while Samuel followed with the wagon containing Clara's performance gown and some new sheet music they had ordered from St. Louis. "Becky's letter came today," Reece mentioned as they rode. "She's asking again when we'll visit St. Louis. Says the children are growing so fast and she wants Rebecca to meet her cousins." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps next spring. The weather would be nice for traveling and the Golden Nugget could spare us for a few weeks by then." They had been discussing the possibility of expanding their business interests, perhaps opening a second music hall in Austin. The success of the Golden Nugget had exceeded even Thornton's optimistic projections, and Clara's reputation as a singer continued to grow. There had even been an offer from a theater company in San Francisco inviting her to perform for a season, an offer she had declined, unwilling to leave Reece and Rebecca for so long. "Spring sounds perfect," Reece agreed. "And while we're in St. Louis, we could visit that piano maker Thornton mentioned. Might be time to upgrade the one at the Nugget." Clara smiled at her husband's continuing enthusiasm for improving their business. What had begun as a desperate gamble to free her from Walsh's control had evolved into a genuine passion for both of them. Reece handled the business aspects with unexpected aptitude, while Clara's artistic direction had transformed the golden nugget into something truly special. As they approached the outskirts of Sweetwater, Clara was struck once again by how much the town had grown. New buildings lined the main street, and the church had added a proper bell tower the previous year. The railroad had finally connected Sweetwater to the main line, bringing increased commerce and visitors. "Remember the first time we rode into town together?" Reece asked, seeming to follow her thoughts. Clara nodded. "I was certain you'd be gone within a week." Just another drifter passing through, Reece reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And now," Clara replied, squeezing his fingers, "I know better than to doubt a promise from Reece Holden." They reached the golden nugget as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The newly painted sign above the door depicted a golden bird in flight, Clara's idea, a symbol of the freedom she had found through her music and her love for Reece. Lanterns glowed invitingly in the windows, and already a small crowd had gathered, waiting for the doors to open. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic than the exterior suggested. Gone were the scarred tables and sticky floors of Walsh's era, replaced by polished wood and comfortable seating arranged to provide clear views of the expanded stage. The bar remained, but now offered coffee and lemonade alongside spirits, and a small kitchen had been added to serve simple meals. As Clara changed into her performance gown, a deep blue creation that Reece had ordered from a dressmaker in Dallas for their anniversary, she could hear the murmur of voices as the evening's patrons found their seats. Samuel was already at the piano, playing a medley of familiar tunes to set the mood. A soft knock at the dressing room door announced Reece's presence. "Ready?" he asked, entering at her invitation. Clara turned from the mirror, and the expression that crossed Reece's face still, after 3 years of marriage, made her heart flutter. He crossed the small room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "You take my breath away, Clara Holden," he murmured. "Every time I see you, it's like that first night all over again." Clara leaned up to brush her lips against his. "You say that every performance night, and I mean it every time." Reece tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. "What will you sing tonight?" Clara smiled mysteriously. "Something new, something I've been working on with Samuel." Reece raised an eyebrow in interest. Clara had begun composing her own songs the previous year, and they had quickly become audience favorites. "Another Clara Gibson Holden original, the folks will be pleased." "This one's special," Clara said softly. "It's about us, about finding home in another person's heart." Emotion flickered in Reece's eyes. "I'd say that makes it the most important song in the world, then." Another knock at the door signaled Samuel's 5-minute warning. Reece offered Clara his arm with a formal bow that made her laugh, and together they walked toward the stage. As she took her position before the expectant audience, Clara felt a familiar surge of gratitude. The path that had brought her here from a beaten, frightened woman to a respected artist, wife, and mother had not been easy or straight. There had been moments of doubt and fear, challenges to overcome, and painful growth. But as she began to sing, her clear voice filling the hall with the melody she had created to celebrate the love that had saved her, Clara knew with absolute certainty that every step of that difficult journey had been leading her home to this place, this moment, this life she had built with Reece. A life where she would always sing with her full heart, fear nothing, and know that she was truly, completely loved. And in the front row, watching her with the same wonder and admiration he had shown that very first night, sat Reece Holden, the cowboy who had promised she would sing again, and who had kept that promise and so many more in the years since. As their eyes met across the crowded room, Clara sang directly to him, letting the music carry all the words of love that even her considerable talent could never fully express. For a woman who had once been beaten for singing, there could be no greater victory, no more perfect happiness, than to stand in the spotlight with her voice soaring free and the love of her life gazing up at her with pride. In that moment, as in every moment they had shared and would share, Clara knew that she had found her truest song at last.